that despite what might happen between the North Koreans and the South Koreans, the Korean spirit must live on. Good afternoon, and welcome to Korean Literature Weekly. I'm your host, Mr. Alan Friesen.
캐나다 한 고등학교 문학 시간에 황순원의 학을 가르치고 있는 앨런 더프리슨 교사입니다. 황순원의 학은 1953년에 발표한 단편소설로 6.25 전쟁 당시 38선 근처의 북쪽 마을을 배경으로 한 소설입니다. 줄거리는 다음과 같습니다. 한마을에서 친구로 지냈던 성삼이와 덕재는 6.25가 터지면서 남과 북의 이념을 달리하는 적대 관계로 만나게 됩니다. 치안대원이 된 성삼이는 덕재가 체포되어 온 것을 보고 청단까지 호송을 자처하며 덕재를 데리고 나섰습니다. 농민동맹 부위원장까지 지낸 덕재에 대한 적대감을 품기도 했으나 대화를 하는 사이 덕재가 농부로서 순박하게 살아온 사실을 알게 되며 마음이 누그러지게 됩니다. 벌판을 지나던 성삼은 그곳에서 덕재와 올가미로 잡은 학을 괴롭히다가 학이 죽을까봐 풀어주었던 옛일을 떠올리며 덕재를 풀어주게 됩니다. 덕재는 성삼의 의도를 알아채고 잡풀 사이로 도망칩니다. 분단과 전쟁이라는 특정한 시대적 배경과 사건을 담고 있는 학이라는 작품을 전혀 다른 역사와 환경 속에서 살고 있는 캐나다 학생들에게 어떻게 가르치는지 관찰하시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 그는 학생들의 이해를 돕기 위해 몇 가지 배경 지식부터 설명하기 시작합니다.
Let's talk about first of all the central figure the central metaphor in this story, which is the crane. In Korean culture, the crane represents immortality and long life. It was believed that the nobles in Korea, back in the Joseon dynasty, if you died, you came back as a crane. They're very noble, very beautiful creatures. It's rumored that they lived 1,600 years. So, we've got these cranes that are present not just in the title, but also throughout the middle and at the very end of the story. And we've got two main characters here, Sang-sam and Tok-che. Sang-sam and Tok-che. So the story begins with the sentence, "This village to the north of the 38th parallel demarcation line was lying utterly still beneath the lofty, clear autumn sky." The language here is a clear indication of the story's setting. The fact that we're talking about north of the 38th parallel indicates that this takes place not only in Korea, but it takes place in Korea after 1945, after the country was split into two. And in fact, we are talking about North Korea here. So, the first thing that we see is this very idyllic pasture. We see a very beautiful image of this town, about how this neighborhood suffered little damage. So, again, we, from a Western point of view, if we know all the facts behind the story, we should be scratching our heads right about now. You've got this guy, Mr. Friesen, you're telling me, from South Korea, who's going up into North Korea, who knows a guy from North Korea, and the guy from South Korea is remembering the North Korean guy with kindness. He was a nice guy. Up to this point, everything in the story fits our Western point of view. We have a South Korean guy going into North Korea and capturing one of those evil North Koreans. Yay, America! This makes sense. But then he remembers him with kindness. And later on in the story, we're going to find that the entire morality that we have imposed upon the text becomes inverted. So Sang-sam remembers the kindness and he gets upset. He feels this tension between his duty as a South Korean officer and between his memories of this person who was his friend. He says, filled with a sudden surge of unexpected rage, Sang-sam shouted, "Hey fellow, how many people did you kill during the war?" He doesn't reply. He doesn't say anything. He's asked again and again. He doesn't say anything. And then he asks, why would someone who had been vice chairman of the Peasants' League stay put and not run away? Were you hiding for some kind of mission? So what Sang-sam is saying here is, he's saying, you were a political entity in this village. You were important in this village. You knew we were coming. Why didn't you try to escape? And the suspicious mind is immediately thinking, and Sang-sam echoes this, Are you planning some sort of mission? Were you planning on trying to hide so that you could somehow come into South Korea and wreck our great country? Because South Korea is the good guys and North Korea is the bad guys. This is what we think as 21st century readers. We automatically put that worldview into our minds when we think of North Korea and South Korea. And he doesn't make excuses. I was made vice chairman of the Peasants' League because I was the son of the poorest peasant and reckoned a hard worker. If that's a crime deserving death, well then, okay. Now as before, I'm a guy who's good at nothing but farming. Now father's lying sick at home. It's already been half a year. Anyway, didn't you realize what would happen if you stayed instead of running away? To which Tokche replies, I was intending to run away. They said that when the Southerners moved north, they would kill every man without exceptions, and they obliged all the men between 17 and 40 to go north. I thought of running away, even carrying father on my back. Then father said no. He said no one ever heard of a farmer planting all his crops, then running away somewhere, leaving everything behind. The reason that Tokche didn't escape was because he was being a good son. This fits right into our notion of an ideal Confucius gentleman. He stayed behind because his father asked him not to. He wanted him to help him deal with the crops because he was sick. And then in the very next paragraph, we get the truth behind Song Sam's story. Back in June, it had been Song Sam's turn to evacuate. That night, he had told his father secretly they should get out. Then his father had said just the same thing. How can a farmer leave his farming and go running off somewhere? Song Sam had left alone. As he went wandering among unfamiliar roads and villages, the thought of the farm work he had left in the hands of his elderly parents and youthful bride never left him. So, whereas Tokche stayed behind in order to look after his father and risked capture at the hands of the Southerners, the North Korean government said that they would be killed. He stayed behind because he was a dutiful son. But Song Sam, early in the war, had escaped and had gone south and had sought his fortune. And by doing so, he proved himself to be an unloyal son. He proved himself to be outside of this order of Confucianism we talked about earlier. He left his wife and his father behind and only cared about himself. This inverts the moral structure of the story. And at the very end of the story, Song Sam, the Southerner, says, let's go crane hunting. He's referring to the time when they were both children and they had secretly captured a crane. And then they had let it go shortly before it had been shot. So he's saying, let's go crane hunting. Why don't you, hurry up and send some cranes over. Why don't you go run over there and see if you can get some cranes to fly out from the ground. He's not telling him to go hunt cranes. He's saying, okay, you know what? This is your chance. Why don't you go run? Why don't you escape? So at the very end of the story, we have this person who is a rebel, who betrays his father, betrays his bride. He decides that he can no longer do this to his best friend, and he lets his best friend escape. At that point, just then, a few red-crowned cranes were slowly flying with outstretched wings across the high blue autumn sky. And as we talked about earlier, the cranes represent long life. They represent immortality. And it's my belief that what they're talking about is not the immortality of any of these characters. They're not even really talking about the immortality of North Korea or South Korea. They're talking about the immortality of the Korean spirit. Song Sam realizes that he's made a mistake by breaking these established rules of Korean society. Not North Korean society, not South Korean society, but the essence of Koreanness. He has broken it. And he's trying to mend it by allowing his friend to escape, instead of being taken back south, tortured and possibly killed by the South Korean government. And because he does this, we have the author creating this flock of cranes that fly overhead as a very powerful symbol that despite what might happen between the North Koreans and the South Koreans, the Korean spirit must live on.
여기까지 앨런 더프리슨 교사의 문학 수업을 들어보았습니다. 황순원의 학은 어떤 파괴적인 상황에서도 훼손할 수 없는 인간성에 대한 믿음을 소설에 담았습니다. 앨런 더프리슨 교사는 작중에 나오는 효부정과 같은 가치들을 서양인의 관점에서 바라보고 해석하였는데, 분단이라는 비극적인 상황에서도 한국적인 정신을 궁극적으로 파괴할 수 없다는 점을 학생들에게 배경 지식과 함께 설명하였습니다. 앞으로도 훌륭한 선생님들이 왜곡 없이 한국 역사, 문학 작품들을 잘 전달해 주기를 바라면서 오늘 준비한 영상 여기서 마치겠습니다. 바쁘시더라도 구독과 좋아요 부탁드립니다. 시청해 주셔서 감사합니다.